From Dragon 360, this is Digital Banter, a podcast focused on modern marketing tactics and driving real business results. And now, here are your hosts, James and Zach.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Digital Banter. As always, I'm Zach. Of course, my co-host James is with me right alongside.
Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back indeed. So we had an idea for this podcast episode, and it really evolved into something that I didn't expect it to be. So really what we're tackling today is taking the mindset of sales enablement. Let's see how many times I messed that up in the episode. Sales enablement materials and moving it to demand creation. Now, what we mean by that is you kind of have these typical sales enablement activities. And if we were to go into that, some of the top ones, right? Typical case studies, trade show booths, product guides. I have always called them one-sheeters, and webinars. And not to say that these aren't powerful, but what we want to do is really elevate the mindset behind how we're utilizing them, where they're being utilized in this demand gen experience, and taking them from this sales-oriented piece of content or information and moving to more of a marketing life cycle and building it into just the natural movement on your marketing team, right? Specifically, case studies. This is one of my favorite ones, and this is really where the conversation started for this podcast episode. Is case studies are always a thing that you have, right? They're on your website, whether they're under resources or the About Us, view our work type thing, right? But then the sales team never really utilizes them. Maybe they'll use a little snippet of it in their sales deck, but it's really, oh, hey, can you send me a case study? Oh, yeah, we'll send you a couple case studies. If they're asking for them, why didn't they have that beforehand, right? And this is where this conversation came from. So historically, this goes back to another comment that James and I have mentioned in, I don't know, a podcast or two, heck, maybe 4 or 5 at this point. But historically, the sales team was being told to do marketing items, while also marketing was being told to do marketing items. And really what we want to get to, and we've mentioned this as well, we want the sales team to be order takers and let the marketing team do the hard work, right?
Yeah, so old school B2B marketing, right, was so focused on trade shows, sales-led organizations, and marketers were essentially, it was heavily product marketing focus of creating marketing materials that sales can then go distribute. And this dates back to honestly like pre-digital, right? So you would go to your trade show once a year, and I mean, maybe more than once a year, but you'd go to your trade show and you would have all of your marketing materials. And that was like your one-shot opportunity to meet with all of your customers. And there's a lot of people who talk about, how this has changed. Like Chris Walker talks a lot about this. Dave Gerhardt talks a lot about this, but it's kind of interesting how old school B2B marketing still takes place. And we'll go into like how we think that should evolve. But I mean, it's exactly what you said, is that historically sales teams have relied on marketing teams to essentially just make materials for them, right? And then the sales team has been responsible for distributing those materials versus, 2022, it's more about how can we get those marketing materials in front of our customers every day rather than making the sales team essentially do marketing and do all of the selling. If you go back to college and the 4 P's of marketing, sales actually falls under marketing, just under the promotional aspect of it, right? Where, marketing is product, pricing, distribution, all of that stuff. And really, I think one of the big things we're talking about here is like content distribution and how it gets to our customers versus what it has been historically. Somebody comes to you and then, the sales team is saying, oh, hey, like, this prospect wanted a case study. Can we create something? Hey, this prospect needs a sales sheet that they can bring to their team internally. Can you go create this? And, marketing they have marketing teams running around in circles rather than having all of that content readily available and actually in multiple different mediums that they can distribute.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, one of the biggest things behind this discussion and why this can be a hot topic and why this is really kind of a a key idea in demand gen, whether you are listening to us here at Digital Banter or listening to other podcasts in this sector, right? It's at the end of the day, standardized sales enablement, what we've known prior, is not scalable. You're not going anywhere with it. And there's a couple reasons behind that, right? One of the biggest one is the sheer amount of people involved, but then also the cold outreach. It's difficult in a traditional style of sale, right? And I've experienced this. I've worked for a SaaS company. I mean, those SDRs, very typical job title for them, right, are making cold calls to these businesses or organizations. What's coming out of that? Why are we, James? I can tell you want to say something.
Like the big thing with sales is sales falls under the assumption that everybody in your ideal customer profile is ready to buy, and it's just whether or not they've heard your story yet. And I mean, the reality is that is just not how it works. You know, you'd have no idea what the financial situation looks like in a certain company, how budget is allocated, who the key decision makers are. Like, all of this stuff changes from company to company. And again, if you're going from this outbound, I mean, you're moving from outbound to inbound. That's what we're talking about. I mean, this is like HubSpot 2006, right? Where if we're creating marketing materials for outbound, there is no scalability to that, because like you said, you're adding headcount, it's cold outreach is difficult. I mean, you reach out to 1,000 people and get in contact with one versus, hey, via paid media on LinkedIn, like I can reach everybody for a price point, of course, and they're going to come to us when they're ready because our messaging resonated, our story resonated, et cetera.
Absolutely. And I think that's a key proponent, right? The messaging, what's out there. We mentioned this, I want to say it was last week or the week prior, that everything needs to work in tandem with each other. When we're making these one-off materials, odds are it's for a very specific purpose. Now, if let's say this client, this prospect is coming from paid media efforts, and yeah, they went through a couple channels, right? They saw stuff on LinkedIn, went retargeted via display, retargeted via Facebook, and then ultimately through a branded search, ended up filling out some sort of form, and now they're to you, the sales team, right? Odds are your one-sheeter that you're going over or sending to them has almost nothing to do with what they've previously read, whether they read a blog, an ebook, whether they were reading just standard ad copy that is long form on LinkedIn, and maybe they didn't engage with it besides, click the see more button type aspect, right? So, and everything has to work in tandem together. So what's the sales aspect, right? At the end of the day, a lot of what the marketing team is putting out there is niche content that is relating to this prospect, right? Typically, it's a problem solution and down the path. So now a sales one-sheeter, in my experience and in a traditional sense, right, is speaking more to the sale and less to the problem solution, right? If you spend this much money with us, you'll get this, as opposed to, hey, here's your problem. We literally have the solution to solve all these with one tool, right? What is going to relate to them more? What have we been speaking to more? Again, everything needs to work together and almost be, again, part of the whole journey together. They go from one spot to another. It should be consistent.
Yeah, we'll get into this a bit, but like it's about storytelling at the end of the day. Like you
Absolutely.
need to have a consistent story and consistent messaging, and that's where these sales-led organizations, all the time wasted when it comes to one-off requests that happen because of events or a specific large deal that they're working on. A lot of that stuff should already be regularly available and not in. It's funny. We talk about, I'm going back to what you said about case studies, right? So
Yeah.
With a case study, what they're looking for is, sales has always asked for a case study, and they want to find a case study that directly relates to whoever they're talking to, right?
Absolutely.
Because whoever they're talking to is asking for proof of, like, hey, prove to me what you're selling does what you say it's going to do. That's all a case study does. And I mean, let's be honest, like, most case studies are kind of a load of BS when it comes to like SaaS stuff, because it's like, I don't know, IBM saved 30 hours and was able to this resulted in this much money, right? That's like basically what a SaaS case study works with. But like that's not the story that is going to make somebody make a decision. They want to see how this is directly applicable to their business, and that's where like you need to have the story behind it. And like I said, we'll go into this in further detail, but I feel like that's a huge gap that's missing right now in how marketers are making materials, is that we're just being reactive rather than proactive.
Absolutely. Back to that case study example, one of the best case studies I ever saw, I can't remember the exact company's name or even who it was from, but it really was, it was following that guideline of, we saved this company 30 hours. And that was what it led with, right? That's a capture, right? If you're someone looking at this like, well, heck, I would love to save 30 hours of labor. But what they did with their case study is they turned it into, what did those 30 hours become? Because they were able to save 30 hours, and you could tell this was an interview process with this client or some sort of system where the client told them this, they were able to, I believe what it came out to be is they almost built a whole new division of their business that ended up resulting in another like $10 million at the end of the year. Because they had this extra 30 hours of manpower that they could put towards these other resources, they were able to re-innovate not only their process, but also their what's it called? Their company, their organization, right? So taking a case study just beyond the face value of, hey, here's what we did, buy us. It needs to be more about leverage your success more than just one KPI that you affected. At the end of the day, What is this business doing because you helped them? Take it a step further.
I think like it's funny, like us as an agency, I feel like we miss that all the time.
Absolutely.
Because we can say, like, I can manipulate a case study to say whatever I want it to say, right?
100%.
Like, I mean, I can't, like, we talk a lot about like startups, right? How many agencies are just riding the coattails of a successful company, right? Like oh, hey, like their revenue grew 10x while they were with us. And it's like, okay, well, that's just because you got in early, they had a really awesome product and it sold, right? Versus what did you actually do to contribute to that growth? And in the agency space, it's impossible to give that level of detail. I would much rather have an open, honest conversation with a prospect around what we think we can do for them, and then maybe cite some relevant examples. But like dropping a case study on them is not, hey, this company increased their traffic, this company increased their clicks, this company had this return on ad spend, right? You can manipulate anything, and in this day and age, I think everybody understands that.
Yeah, and see, that's the problem too, is people can read through the bullshit these days, right? So it's becoming more and more important. The importance is growing here to be relevant, right? Be helpful, as opposed to being sales forward. You need to be able to be there. It's like, hey, we've got your back. We're a team behind you, right? And I think that's an agency kind of model, right? We've talked about it before, partnership versus vendor, right? We're here to help you, or, hey, we actually have your back. We're a part of your team, right? And that kind of speaks to that mentality. And it goes to it speaks the same to what you're putting out there. So, really the looming question here, right? And I think we're going to go through each of these kind of examples we've talked about, is how do we reach our audience and change the sales enablement mentality to be helpful, relatable, relevant, whatever, spark word we want to use for this, right? How do we do this? And I think the best way to do it is talk about how we can really leverage our content to a whole new level. And I think, we've been on this case study pathway because I think that is one of the more underutilized but overused pieces of material, if that makes sense. Case studies are something that, I don't know, I guess we kind of shit on it a little bit, right? But really what it needs to turn into is a user story. And I talked about pardon me. I talked about the case study that I absolutely loved. And again, this was years ago. I couldn't even tell you what it was. I wish I could share it with our audience because it was fantastic. It was a user story because it told the story of, hey, in the first paragraph, we used their software. They did a good job. We saved this much time, right? Save money, save time. Very typical, right? But then it became 2 or 3 more pages of, Here's what we did with that time that they saved us. Here's what we did with that money that they saved us. This legitimately worked because we were able to do this, right? And at the end of the day, what you can chalk that up to is more, user-generated content, UGC, if you will.
Yeah, so my philosophy here is that a recommendation, let's go back to where marketing originated, word of mouth.
Yep.
Word of mouth recommendation is 100 times more effective than proof that you did, essentially like fake proof that you did what you said you were going to do via a case study, right? Would you rather have 5 recommendations from 5 different CMOs who worked with you and had an awesome experience? Or would you rather have a bunch of stats that showed that their revenue increased over the time that they were working with you, right? I would go with those recommendations any day, because it's and this kind of goes back to brand. It's about whatever that brand experience is working with you as a company. If you're a software product, like, I mean, does it do what it says it's going to do? In most cases, the answer is yes. But the things that you don't know is like, is it easy to use? Was it difficult to onboard with your team? Like, what are some of the other pain points aside from the results that this tool helped you accomplish? And that's where your agency side, I think it's exactly the same way. Like, I would much rather have those recommendations than a bunch of stats that I pulled up. And I would encourage people to ask for recommendations. But really what this goes into is playing on the emotional element of these case studies. Absolutely. A lot more than the statistical elements of these case studies. And that actually changes the form, like it really changes the format of the content itself, right? Like, most case studies are PDF documents that are about 3 pages long. They talk about the problem, the solution to the problem, and
here's a pretty graph.
And here's a pretty graph. Here's the stats at the end. But like, who was the hero of that story? This is a film storytelling. Like, who's the hero of the story, and what did they get out of it? Right? Did the director of demand gen get promoted to CMO because the demand gen activities got whatever? Like, you want to be relatable to the individual. And I mean, the best way to do that is through social content, video content. Take those case studies and transition them into user stories. The stats will come out. Like, if you drove results like, and you're doing an interview with somebody that you've worked with, if it's like those stats will come out and they'll be 10 times more meaningful. Like, all they need to know is, I'm going to use us as an example, being a marketing agency. Like, our business grew and we were like super happy working with these guys. This is how they work. They were super organized. This is roughly what our strategy was. And it just becomes much, much more relatable than saying like, hey, we did paid media and we had a return on ad spend of 500%. Having no idea how those metrics were actually calculated.
Absolutely. You kind of nailed it on the head. One looming question, right, is back in traditional marketing, right? Recommendations are a little bit easier, especially if you looked at like a localized company, right? Now with everything so digital, how does one go, how do I get a recommendation from this CMO to CMO to CMO, right? With being so digital, the easiest way, again, is that video content. We've talked about it before. Short form, easy to digest, snackable content is simple. Well, I shouldn't say simple. But what I'm trying to get at is you don't have to overcomplicate it, right? You don't have to get a full-on video crew into their office to do this massive recording where they're in a suit, you have a backdrop, lighting, makeup, all this stuff, right? Sure, that will be a great freaking video, no question of that. Well, hopefully if you have a good editing team, a good freaking video. But even if it's something as, hey, much like our CEO records videos from his office with a webcam and a nice mic, he could do a recommendation for something via just what he has available to him. Something that is not necessarily a scripted story, but more actually coming from the heart, it speaks back to what you're talking about, right? There's got to be emotion. What's the biggest thing marketing teams struggle with? It's the buy-in. Where does that buy-in come from? These people need to trust you. So if it's going to feel like a scripted event where they're being told what to say, almost like a hostage situation, then yeah, it's probably going to come off that way. But if it's a CMO that is genuine about, hey, here's what actually happened. I was able to grow my team. And in today's recession, lingering feel out there, being able to say I grew a team because this software helped me do this, I mean, that's worth more than any script could ever give you.
This is going to vary industry to industry too.
100%.
So, I mean, we come from a professional services background, being a marketing agency, and I think like a big part of this too, I feel like this falls under case studies, is like that the idea of evangelism and being out there posting, basically showing that you know what the hell you're talking about, right? This podcast is like a perfect example of that. The videos that come from this podcast are a perfect example of that. Like, we're not actively trying to earn business and sell or whatever. Like we're just trying to show that we know what the hell we're talking about. Now you may listen to this and say, hey, these guys don't know what the hell they're talking about. And I think you're wrong, but it is what it is. But again, I think of that as a version of a case study. I mean, a great episode that we should do sometime are like, hey, here are the common mistakes that we find when we take over work from other agencies, and this is how we fix it. And this is the results that it leads to. Because like there's, we take over stuff all the time. It's just kind of like messy, littered with mistakes. And, honestly, most people who are searching for an agency kind of comes down to, they know something's going on. They don't know what's going on. And they're just looking for somebody to kind of rip apart the current agency's work and show them that they can do better. And, being able to break down something like that into content, like, hey, here's a live audit of like what we do as a professional services firm. Like, this is the steps that we go through. This is our framework that we follow. And if you do all of those things, by the time somebody reaches out to you, I'll be honest, they shouldn't even ask for a case study. Mm-hmm. They should be like, oh, hey, I'm working with James. James, I've been listening to your podcast for a while. I really like the stuff that you say, and let's do this thing.
Absolutely. No, that's great. I think, we've really hit the head on case studies and how we can transition them. If we were to chalk it up, right, go to more used stories, less of a traditional case study. I think if you were to sum it up in any way. Mm-hmm. Now, another one that's very traditional and one that even I don't even have a ton of experience with is trade show booths. My knowledge of trade shows is you put up a booth for a lot of money. Typically it's a lot of money. Sometimes, if your company decides to be a bronze, gold, silver, platinum sponsor of the event, maybe you get a booth as well. But ultimately, you're paying for these booths to showcase your product to potentially people who don't actually care. They're just there to see what's out there. Or you're trying to, James, I think you put it right, speak to investors to try and get some funding or even sell different things like that, right? On another piece, right, you typically have marketers who are attending the events. And if the purpose of it, I believe we just attended SaaStr, right? We just had a representative of ours at SaaStr. And you were telling me that the purpose of that convention or trade show, was SaaS companies looking for funding or investors. We're there as marketers, right? We're there building connections. How open to those conversations of those people, right? To marketing. They're not there to be sold. They're there to sell type aspect.
It's right? Like trade shows are extremely tough. And there's a lot of people who talk about this already, so I'm not going to go into huge detail, but again, if you guys haven't figured out, I'm a Chris Walker fan to some extent. But like one of the things that he always talks about is like, why would you go to a trade show when you can do this literally every day online? And he's spot on, because it's not only, but it's more than just like the time and effort that goes into a single event for people that you can reach every day. The other thing is like the time wasted at those events. So I'm going to give an example, and this example is strictly related to me, my personality. And don't get me wrong, there are other people who are different, but going to these events and meeting people and talking to people isn't the easiest thing to do in the world. Usually, go in as an agency or kind of whatever your business is, and you're like, okay, these are the people who are going to be there. These are the people that I want to talk to. And then you get there and there's 10,000 people there and you really don't know where they are unless they have a booth, and then you go to their booth and it's not necessarily the person you wanted to talk to. So there's all this time wasted in like trying to find the right people to talk to. And then me, like I actually consider myself like a fairly outgoing guy, and like I'll go and I'll like walk up to somebody based on their badge, like, oh, you work at this company, what are you here for? What are you looking to get out of this? And then I'll end up talking to them for 20 minutes and find out that they are like, certainly like there's no there's no value in this relationship besides like, hey, you're a nice guy, I'm a nice guy, like this was a good conversation. But we're talking about an event that's maybe 3 days long, and 20% of the people that you talk to are going to be interested in what you have to say, whether they have existing solutions or whatever it is. So as you're going up to people, just because you're a friendly person, you're spending a half hour or 20 minutes with somebody just shooting the shit about absolutely nothing, which is just time wasted. Like if you really are going there from a business perspective. Now there's tons of value in that, like, personal growth. There's a lot of things that I think live events do bring to the table. But if your goal is like business development at live events, like I think that I don't know, it is kind of a giant waste of time and money at this point, when you can be hitting those people every single day online.
Yeah, in speaking to kind of how we reach people online, right? It's all about building a community, right? Those people who are at those events are online in some way. Now, there's a lot of tools and methods, right? One of the biggest ones, right? A lot of people are going to be active on LinkedIn. Do a live session on LinkedIn. Literally be there for Q&A. Have a topic, of course, in mind, but you can go live on LinkedIn, literally speaking to those same people. Same thing here, right? Some of these new channels up and coming, right? TikTok Live. You can go live on TikTok. Now, that's probably one that's underutilized in the B2B SaaS space, but it's still a very valid option. One of the ones that I think that is more professionally utilized, and this is one I have never dabbled in myself, but it's Twitter Spaces. I see a lot of people going live in Twitter Spaces. I actually am aware of a couple podcasts not related to marketing that do live podcasts in Twitter Spaces. And it's a very interesting way to get community feedback, community questions in like real time. But it's a way you can utilize that. Another one that, again, is very similar to LinkedIn Live, maybe a little different audience, is Facebook Live. You can go live on Facebook from your company's page, right? If you're the CMO, or let's just say demand gen director or manager of demand gen, whatever your title is, you can go live speaking to your community that you're hopefully building, if not already built or consistently building through various means, right? And speak to them directly. Let them type you a question in real time. Another one, of course, is YouTube streaming. I mean, there's so many streaming sites of where you can go live out there. But if you think about it, what is one big aspect of why people don't want to get on a sales call, right? It's formal. It's almost like a semi-commitment of I'm willing to hear you out, but I still have questions, right? And you don't want to waste a salesperson's time. You also don't want to waste your time. These live features, whether it be a social media live aspect or something like a Twitter Spaces where it's mainly just audio, it's informal. You're inviting people to come in and talk to you, to ask questions, right? What is a trade show? You're setting up a booth for people to come up to you, ask questions, talk about your product, right? Yeah, you might have someone who comes in, wants to talk to you about trying to sell you something. Odds are that may actually happen in a live. But at the end of the day, that's just the reality of it, right? You have a business, people are going to want to sell to you, just as you're trying to sell to people yourself. I think I've already kind of mentioned it. Webinars. Those are probably the more utilized in this space, whether it be an on-demand webinar or even a live webinar that becomes an on-demand, right? Sending out registrations. Very common piece of advertising that's out there. We're having a webinar on this date. Join us. Register ahead to get the link right in your inbox. At the end of the day, it's all about connecting with your people online. Now, James, what I will say about the trade shows, again, our representative, you spoke to him who went to SaaStr, right? He was saying that people were saying it was nice to see everyone in person. Is that correct?
I mean, that came from him, but that also came from everywhere.
Oh, well, from him.
That came from everybody who posted about SaaStr online had nothing to do with who was there, how nice the booths were, blah, 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 blah. It was all about like, oh man, it was so nice to see these people in person, because over the course of COVID, honestly, like all these online communities were built. Connections from these online communities are 10 times stronger than the way it used to be, where you used to meet somebody at a conference and kind of stay in touch and then forget about them in 6 months, right? Because you're just like actively engaged, actively sharing thoughts. Like I think like I'm part of like Exit 5. This was a big thing that everybody said there. Like they're a bunch of SaaS people and they were just, hey, they had their meetup and it was nice to meet everybody in the group. That's like what it was. It was about meeting people in person, which obviously like there's still a ton of value of that in-person element, but meeting somebody in person for the first time after you've been engaging with their content for 6 months is much different than going up to somebody at a conference and being like, oh, hey, your badge says that you work for IBM. That's cool. What are you looking at doing here? So it probably, brings a lot more life to the event too.
Absolutely. There's nothing more genuine than meeting someone in person. But again, I mean, even as COVID has showed us, it reshaped the world. People had to adjust, right? I'll be honest, since COVID really hit, I've seen more lives and streaming services and webinars than I ever did before, because a lot of people did save their budgets for trade shows, right? And one of the biggest things you mentioned about trade shows is the cost, right? Just the booth alone. We're not even talking about travel and odds are food stipends or reimbursements, whatever it is, right?
All to get a
going
badge
live
stand.
on LinkedIn. Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, going live on LinkedIn, Facebook, all that really takes is one, having a webcam of some sort, having a microphone of some sort, in some essences that may be built into your webcam. I don't recommend that. And then ultimately the time to create a profile or a page, which doesn't have to be great to go live, right? Technically, it can be as simple can be. That's pretty dang cheap compared to a trade show.
I think the one thing that I don't want to say we're downplaying a little bit here, is like you got to build an audience, you got to make connections.
Oh, of course.
You have to take the effort. Like you're not just gonna like go set up a profile and go live and have people follow. You're not gonna just go start posting content to LinkedIn and have people follow you. Like part of being part of an online community is engaging with other people's stuff. It's not a build it and they will come scenario. Like you've got to be part of it. You've got to be engaged. You've got to contribute to the community, and then people will, see validity in what you're doing, and then, start attending your stuff. Like there's certainly work that goes into it. Maybe that is a little bit of a difference between, I say, like, if you sponsor a show and spend $100,000 on a booth or whatever, like, yeah, I guess it is kind of a build it and they will come thing. Like if you give away enough cupcakes, like you'll have somebody recognize who your brand is from this show. But I mean, the cost analysis on that cannot be positive. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. I like that you said the cupcakes thing, because I've always gotten little koozies.
What was I was listening to a podcast this morning, somebody talking about SaaStr, and they said like one of the cool things with the booths there was like somebody had like they were printing selfies on cookies. Like, I'm sorry, like it's okay. Like, all right, now tell me what that company did. Okay.
Yeah, no kidding.
Like,
if the one thing you take away,
are they like, were the cookies good? Like, what was the flavor? Like,
right. Oh, that's funny. I mean, that's creative. You get people to your booth.
Your wife's a baker. Next thing that we do, I want her to figure out how we can print selfies on cake.
I'm sure it's an expensive machine.
Way better than a cookie. We'll do it right on a full-size cake.
Full-size cake.
Funfetti.
All right. You hear it here first. Dragon 360 at SaaStr 2023 will have selfie-printed cakes. James
Funfetti.
Just confirmed. I'll let him figure it out, and we'll go from there. So,
Fun.
but moving on from trade shows, One of the ones that I think is way too typical in a sales aspect are these product guides, one-sheeters, whatever you want to call them, right? They're pretty much given upon request. It's almost like in an interview, right? References available upon request. Same thing. One-sheeters available upon request, right? At the end of the day, right, you're creating these product guides, these very easy to consume, back to what we were talking about, right? Snackable content, but you're making it almost be like Uber gated. It's almost like prison style gated because you got to speak to the rep or someone to get it. It's not even just fill out a form.
Sometimes
typically.
they'll fill out sometimes they'll be just behind a form, but
Yes, I'm talking more on a sales aspect, right? But at the end of the day, you've created this product guide, a very easy to understand product guide that odds are has some relevant information, right, to an industry, and if you market that correctly. But at the end of the day, why does a salesperson have to give this to you in a traditional sense? Why can't this just be readily available? Now, you did mention there are some out there, of course, you fill out a form, you can download it right away or have access to it right away.
But it's like a
Typically
sales guide is
easy.
what your product does. Like, it's not.
Absolutely.
I don't know. Yeah, I struggle with the same thoughts that you do around this. Like, why does this
make it hard?
I mean, think about how many clients we've worked with over the years where you've literally gone to their website and like you're not able to actually tell what they do. You know, it's just like
there's still clients from forever ago that I don't understand. What
even in our industry, like you go to an agency and it's just like literally filled with like marketing buzzwords. Like I went to a search agency's website the other day, and literally nowhere on their website did they like say that they do paid media, advertising, paid search. It was all just like a bunch of bullshit strategy buzzwords.
It's a good question.
I'm sure that's also that somebody can reach out to a sales team, and then you put together a custom deck based on their thing, and then also follow up on that call with a link to a one-sheeter of what they actually do.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, right, make it readily available. One specific aspect to that, right, is don't gate them. Make it easier to attain them. One really cool aspect that is actually a recent release of LinkedIn, I'm sure it's been in beta testing at some point or alpha testing with some people, but are these what's called document ads. We don't need to get into that nitty gritty, right? To be honest with you, our CEO, Andy, if you follow him on LinkedIn, made a video explaining these and how they can be utilized. So I recommend checking that out. Shout out to Andy. He's been on our podcast. He originated here. We built him. We made him. He's going to listen to this and slap me now. But at the end of the day, right, these document ads, what it's doing is essentially instead of a typical essence of, let's say, an ebook, having to have a LinkedIn ad that then transports you to the website to fill out a form and download the ebook, it's almost putting that ebook right into LinkedIn. We talk about, right, on-channel lead forms versus website lead forms. Right? Typically, you're going to get less quality from an on-channel lead form because it's less steps, right? But in this case, when we're wanting to get information out there, isn't that really what we want? Less steps.
And so you can do this. I was going to say the big thing about this too, you can add it on the organic side too. It's like think about like linking these documents to your LinkedIn account. Like, oh, here's our sales sheet, here's our case, here's our user stories, right? And just kind of have links to all those docs. And it's like, oh, this is awesome. Like, I don't even have to, like, I discovered you on LinkedIn, and now I can actually learn about you on LinkedIn rather than having to
actually figure out what you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's wonderful. And product guides and one-sheeters should be created around that aspect, right? One, what the heck do you do? Whether that is industry specific, maybe it's problem solution specific, but these one-sheeters are guiding through a very specific answer. Whether it is as broad as what is the product, or two, how did we help the SaaS industry or the fintech industry or MarTech industry, whatever it is, right? So make it readily available. I don't think we have to hit that one on the head. We hit it on the head in almost every other podcast, right? Gates, there's a purpose and place for them. A one-sheeter product guide with easy to read content, it's not the place for them. Most times. Asterisk. Read it down in the comments below of what our asterisk is, right? But at the end of the day, I think people are starting to get the idea of what we're getting at here, right? We're taking these traditional sales enablement marketing materials that the marketing team took time to make, and transitioning them to a more commonplace demand creation thought process behind them. Really, at the end of the day, it's all about do a better storytelling. Add emotion to what you're doing, right? That goes back to the user-generated content. That goes back to what we were talking about in the trade shows aspect, right? Make sure you're going live, connect with your community that you're working on building. Maybe you've already built it, whatever it is, right? And then the product guides, giving them the easy to understand information right up front. Again, the whole purpose here is to take this sales team and turn them into cashiers, order takers, whatever you want to call them, right? They're at the drive-through window ready to take the money.
That's it, man.
Man, turn sales to order takers. I'm telling you, when we launch a merch store, that's going to be the first thing. So
Has a little cashier on it.
Has a little cashier. I like a little cashier hat, little name badge with it. I like it. But
Hi, I'm your sales development rep.
ultimately, I don't think we can close it up any better than that. At the end of the day, let's make it easy to build a community, speak to your audience, and give them what they want versus what you think they want. So thank you again for listening in this week. We'll be back next week with another amazing topic. Not sure what it is yet, but we'll have it and we'll be ready for you. So again, if you've made it this far, we appreciate you. Again, we do have a YouTube channel. We would love your support over on YouTube. Be sure to follow us on our various social medias, whether that's TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever it is. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Digital Banter. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes are uploaded every Friday. In the meantime, keep up with the show by following James and Zach on social media. Links are in the show notes.